Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Today's topic is systemic hypertension, which is an extremely important topic considering the fact that the cause of hypertension most of the time is not known. Secondly, the incidence is increasing with alarming proportion, and sometimes it presents with complications, the patient not knowing the signs and symptoms. So in that sense it becomes a silent carrier. Now at the end of the lecture, the student should be able to know the mechanism of blood pressure regulation. How do you define hypertension? What are the types of hypertension? Causes of secondary hypertension? What is the underlying pathogenesis of primary or essential hypertension? And what is the clinical correlation? Now, definition of hypertension. First of all, why we call it systemic hypertension? Because it is found in the entire peripheral vasculature. There is another type of hypertension which is confined to the pulmonary arteries and its branches, which is called pulmonary hypertension. Now, when we say hypertension, it means raised blood pressure on repeated occasions, not one time. Say for example, in the morning and then in the evening and next day again. If the blood pressure is high on repeated occasions, then we call it hypertension. Now, by definition, it is the measurement of force against the arterial wall as the heart pumps blood through the vascular system in the body. It means that during left ventricular contraction, there is certain stroke volume which is ejected from aortic valve to the systemic circulation. The force with which the blood strikes the arterial wall is actually the blood pressure. Now let's talk about the factors which regulate normal blood pressure. It depends on two important factors, the cardiac output and the peripheral vascular resistance. Cardiac output is actually depends on the stroke volume, which in turn depends on the blood volume and heart rate. Now, when we say blood volume, it means that the amount of blood circulating at any given time in the peripheral vasculature, and very importantly, it depends on sodium homeostasis. It means that how much sodium content is in the blood, because the sodium amount is directly proportional to the water content of the blood. Heart rate is also a very important factor. Normally, the heart rate on an average is like 75-80 beats per minute, and which too also depends on the contractility of the heart muscle. The second important factor is the peripheral vascular resistance, which depends on the tone and elasticity of arteries, which in turn depends on hormonal factors and the neuronal or neural factors. Normally, there is a fine balance between vasoconstrictors and vasodilators. Whenever the blood volume is increased, there will be increase in the vasodilators and vice versa, and this is called autoregulation. There is another system known as renin-angiotensin-aldosterone mechanism to regulate blood pressure, and this I will explain subsequently. Myocardial natriuretic peptide is secreted by the wall of atrium and the ventricles, and the function of this is to decrease the reabsorption of sodium from the distal tubules whenever there is increase in the blood volume, and this we will explain subsequently. Now, in the diagram, if you see, the blood pressure depends on the peripheral resistance and the cardiac output. Talking about cardiac output, it depends on the blood volume or the stroke volume, which in turn depends on the sodium content of the blood, the mineralocorticoids from the adrenals, and atrial natriuretic peptide, which I have already mentioned. Now, during filtration of urine, when sodium is being excreted from the kidneys, almost 95% of that is reabsorbed from the distal tubules. The adrenal gland through aldosterone also affects the reabsorption of sodium from the distal tubules. Atrial natriuretic hormone, already mentioned, whenever there is increase in blood volume, this is going to act on the distal tubule, and sodium reabsorption is decreased. Other factors on which cardiac output depends are the heart rate and contractility of the heart. So in certain conditions, heart rate may be increased, like in fever or when there is hyperdynamic circulation. So in that case, we may expect the cardiac output to increase. Contractility of the heart depends on the muscle strength of the myocardium. In certain disease states, the muscle may be flabby, dilated, and then in that case, the contractility of the heart will be decreased and it will affect the cardiac output. The other important factor is the peripheral vascular resistance, which depends, number one, on the hormonal factors. I have already mentioned there are vasoconstrictors and vasodilators. They are mainly secreted by the kidneys, also to some extent some of them from the endothelial lining of the blood vessels, and so on. So there is a long list of vasoconstrictors: angiotensin II, catecholamines, thromboxane, certain leukotrienes, and endothelin. Then we have vasodilators: prostaglandins, kinin, and nitric oxide. Nitric oxide being a very important vasodilator. So I told you normally there is a fine balance between the two, and whenever sometimes there is increase in the blood volume, there will be dilatation of blood vessel, and the flow of blood will be decreased, and vice versa. They all affect the peripheral vascular resistance. The concept of autoregulation I have already mentioned, that this is because of the fine balance between vasoconstrictors and dilators, and fine tuning done by the pH of blood and oxygen saturation. Then neural factors: alpha adrenergic are the vasoconstrictors and beta adrenergic are the vasodilators. I have already mentioned about renin, angiotensin, aldosterone mechanism. Renin is an enzyme secreted by juxtaglomerular apparatus of the cells of the kidneys. Now, whenever there is decrease in the cardiac output due to fluid loss resulting in hypotension, there will be less blood going to the kidneys, or there will be renal ischemia. This will affect the filtration rate from the glomeruli, and this triggers the release of renin. Renin comes in the circulation. It acts on a substrate from the liver known as angiotensinogen and converts into angiotensin 1. And in the lungs there is an enzyme known as convertase which converts it into angiotensin 2. It is a potent vasoconstrictor, and through receptors it acts on the adrenal cortex to release aldosterone, which in fact acts on the distal tubules of the kidneys and increases the reabsorption of sodium, and of course that results in increase in the water content, and the blood pressure is restored. So it is like this. This is the normal sequence, but in primary or essential hypertension this may be deranged, and this will have serious consequences over the blood pressure regulation. Normally about 98% of sodium is reabsorbed from the distal tubules through active transport mechanism. Only 2% is affected by the renin-angiotensin-aldosterone mechanism, which is extremely important, although it's only just 2%. So if there is any derangement in this mechanism, there will be alteration in the blood pressure. Now with this background knowledge, that is the definition of hypertension, then the regulation of blood pressure, let's talk about the classification of hypertension or its types. Broadly classified into primary, which is idiopathic, also known as essential hypertension, seen in 95% of the cases. Now essential here, the term is misnomer. Actually it is primary or idiopathic hypertension. Only 5% individuals may have secondary hypertension where there is known underlying cause which is treatable. Usually there is benign hypertension. Why we call it benign? Because the raised blood pressure is mild to moderate and not usually associated with complications. It is further divided into systolic and diastolic. There is no fixed definition of normal blood pressure or high blood pressure, unfortunately. It keeps on changing. But the accepted one by majority of the personnel is that systolic blood pressure 120 or slightly less than 120 millimeter of mercury, and diastolic 80 or slightly less than 80 millimeter of mercury. Pre-hypertension, systolic between 120 to 139 and diastolic between 80 to 89. Stage 1 hypertension between 140 to 159 systolic and 90 to 99 diastolic. Stage 2 systolic has increased from 160 millimeter of mercury and diastolic above 100 millimeter of mercury. Now recently American Heart Association, about 1 or 2 years back, they have redefined the normal range of blood pressure. They say that 130 systolic and 80 diastolic is the cutoff. Whenever the patient has 130 systolic blood pressure and 80 diastolic blood pressure, it should be considered as hypertension, but it should be treated with lifestyle modification and dietary changes. Only when the blood pressure is 140 or more, or diastolic blood pressure 90 or more, it should be pharmacologically treated. Now when we say systolic hypertension, it means that increase in the stroke volume due to blood volume, increase in the heart rate and peripheral resistance. Diastolic blood pressure, actually there is increase in the and diastolic volume. Whenever heart pumps blood, it pumps blood with certain force, and that is the systolic blood pressure. When the heart chambers relax, any blood which is left after systole and in the diastole, that is the end diastolic volume, and it has certain pressure within the heart and also in the vasculature, and that is called diastolic blood pressure. Usually there is increase in systolic blood pressure, which also results in some increase in diastolic blood pressure. But there are few conditions in which there is predominantly diastolic hypertension or purely diastolic hypertension, and that is because of hypothyroidism, obesity, and fluid overload. There is another type of hypertension known as malignant hypertension, which is seen in 5% of the cases. It is a rapidly developing hypertension, and by definition, systolic blood pressure 200 mm of mercury or more, diastolic 120 mm of mercury or more. It is associated with complications like renal failure and retinal hemorrhages and exudates. Now, causes of secondary hypertension. I have already mentioned that when we say secondary hypertension, it means the cause is known and this is treatable in most of the situations. Mainly the renal causes, chronic renal failure, for example, or parenchymatous or tubular renal disease, renovascular disease, like for example renal stenosis. Endocrine causes, Cushing syndrome, hypo and hyperthyroidism, pheochromocytoma, primary aldosteronism, and hyperparathyroidism. Two important ones are the pheochromocytoma and primary aldosteronism. Pheochromocytoma, in fact, the tumor of renal medulla. There is increase in the chromaffin cells which secrete catecholamines, and that results in high blood pressure because of the vasoconstriction. The patient has hypertension, there is vomiting, there is anxiety, and sometimes there is diarrhea also. Primary aldosteronism is one of the important and frequently occurring as compared to other causes of the secondary hypertension. Here there may be because of the adrenal hyperplasia or adrenal adenoma, and this actually results in increased aldosterone secretion, which will result in increased reabsorption of sodium from the distal tubules. Vascular causes, atherosclerosis. Atherosclerosis, in fact, hypertension is the risk factor for atherosclerosis, but once atherosclerosis occurs, it results in narrowing of the blood vessels and contributing towards hypertension further. It is a normal phenomenon as we age or in the old age, and also exaggerated atherosclerosis you also see in diabetes mellitus. That is why patients with diabetes mellitus usually have hypertension. Drugs, in oral contraceptives, in fact, estrogen in the liver induces secretion of renin, and that of course will result in hypertension. Pregnancy, preeclampsia is a condition. During pregnancy you have high blood pressure. Immunological causes, stressful situation, anxiety, raised intracranial pressure, and sleep apnea, they may all result in hypertension. Oral contraceptives, pregnancy I've already mentioned. Genetic factors. Now, there are certain genetic factors, for example, mutations in the genes affecting aldosterone metabolism, resulting in increased secretion of aldosterone, and increased sodium reabsorption, and increased blood volume, resulting in high blood pressure. There are certain genes which affect sodium reabsorption from the distal tubules, and mutation of that may upregulate sodium reabsorption from the distal tubules. Now let's talk about essential hypertension. I told you the word essential is a misnomer. It's actually primary or idiopathic hypertension. The mechanism still not fully understood, but there is an interplay between the genetic and environmental factors. The most important thing is the reduced renal excretion of sodium in urine. It means there is increased reabsorption of sodium from distal tubules, and that is maybe genetically determined, and also in old age there is tendency of increased reabsorption of sodium from the distal tubules. That would result in increased fluid volume and cardiac output will be increased. Increased peripheral resistance, this may be functional because of neural and the hormonal factors, but there are structural changes occurring in the vessel wall. There is, for example, smooth muscle cell hyperplasia, resulting in narrowing of the blood vessels, causing increased peripheral resistance. Hypertension, which is idiopathic, runs in families, and it may be racial. For example, it is more seen in blacks, especially, for example, African American blacks. Certain mutations have been identified, the genes controlling the renin-angiotensin aldosterone mechanism, and when this is deranged, there may be increased renin secretion or increased sensitivity to angiotensin 2, and this will result in increased sodium reabsorption, causing hypertension. Then again, genes affecting the sodium reabsorption. Risk factors and environmental factors, most of them are modifiable. Age, as the age advances, there is some increase in blood pressure. But hypertension, if it is diagnosed at an earlier age, definitely it has its consequences, and it results in short lifespan. Somehow females do better in hypertension. We still don't know the cause. Cigarette smoking, in fact, is a risk factor for atherosclerosis, and atherosclerosis, when it's fully established, contributes towards hypertension. Excessive alcohol intake will result in increase in the blood volume. Caffeine intake and carbonated drinks, they all affect, for example, any drink will affect the blood volume, and also this caffeine and carbonated, they affect the peripheral resistance. Hyperlipidemia or increased cholesterol will result in increased incidence of atherosclerosis. Excessive salt intake, this is the single most important factor contributing towards hypertension. Obesity, especially central obesity and visceral obesity, related with a syndrome known as metabolic syndrome, associated with increased blood pressure. Stress, anxiety, type A personalities, which are anxious, nervous personalities, they all usually have high blood pressure. Sedentary lifestyle, no activity, no exercise, no walk, so all contribute towards increasing blood pressure, because light exercise, walking, all help in maintaining normal blood pressure. Racial factors, I've already mentioned that blacks have more tendency towards having hypertension. Diabetes mellitus Most of the patients as complication of diabetes have high blood pressure, and one of the most important factor is hyperlipidemia and also atherosclerosis. Now, if we summarize the pathogenesis of hypertension, I've already mentioned there are genetic influences mainly, and there is contribution of the environmental factors. Among the genetic factors, the most important is the defect in the renal sodium homeostasis. There is increased sodium reabsorption from the distal tubule, and there is decreased excretion of sodium in the urine, causing salt and water retention, increasing in the blood volume or plasma volume, causing increased cardiac output and blood pressure. There will be some autoregulation, but within limits. The peripheral vascular resistance may be functionally increased because of certain hormones and neural factors, and there may be structural changes, that is smooth muscle cell proliferation and hyperplasia, causing vascular wall thickness and narrowing, adding towards total peripheral resistance, resulting in hypertension. Now, complications, mainly vascular complications. This may be in the form of accelerated atherosclerosis, because it is an important risk factor for atherosclerosis, and with time there are certain degenerative changes occurring in the walls of the large and medium arteries, and in fact the vessel wall becomes leaky. There is a condition known as hyaline arteriosclerosis seen in benign hypertension. The blood vessels become leaky, and there is deposition of proteinaceous material causing thickening of the arterial walls and loss of underlying structure. This proteinaceous material is pinkish, and this causes narrowing of the blood vessel, causing vasoconstriction. So it will be like this: proteinaceous material leaking out and depositing on the vessel wall, causing narrowing of the blood vessels. This also occurs not only in long-standing hypertension, but also as the age advances, and also in diabetic patients. Then we have hyperplastic arteriosclerosis, which is seen in malignant hypertension, and this is actually concentric laminated like onion skin, thickening of the arterial walls, narrowing the lumen of the blood vessels. In fact, there is fibrin deposition and collagen deposition, and also smooth muscle proliferation, resulting in fibrinoid necrosis and narrowing of the blood vessels, damaging the vessel wall, known as necrotizing arteriosclerosis. And it's like this: concentric onion skin appearance in the vessel wall, causing narrowing of blood vessels. And this is only seen in malignant hypertension, not in benign. In the benign, I have already mentioned, it is the hyaline arteriosclerosis. Now, as a result of this mainly brunt being on the blood vessels, this also results affect the blood vessels of the kidneys and the brain. So there will be atherosclerosis and arteriosclerosis. Sometimes there are small dilatation in the which are abnormal in the vessel wall, and this may get ruptured because of the high blood pressure. Sometimes there is blood pressure so high it can dissect through the layers of the vessel wall, like intima, media, and all this. Nephrosclerosis of within the kidneys. This term means that there is sclerosis and narrowing of the arterioles and smaller arteries of the kidneys, and this may be benign or malignant nephrosclerosis. Of course, malignant nephrosclerosis will occur in malignant hypertension, and this ultimately results in renal damage, the glomerular damage, the tubular damage, and tubulointerstitial damage. Ultimately, there is renal failure. In the CNS there will be stroke, and this stroke usually occurs because of the intracranial bleed or intraparenchymatous bleed. There are lacunar infarcts. It means that lacunar means that there is a leg-like but small 15 millimeter size infarcts. There are sometimes slit hemorrhages, and this all results in stroke. And another important condition is hypertensive encephalopathy. When the blood pressure is very high, the patient has severe headache, there is confusional state, sometimes fits, and sometimes the patient may be semi-comatose. Now, very important are the cardiac complications. This is known as hypertensive heart disease. Long-standing hypertension will result in left ventricular hypertrophy. It means that the left ventricle has to work against the, of course, the pressure load of the blood. So it has to pump with more force, and this because as a secondary phenomenon there is hypertrophy of the left ventricular muscles, and the size of the heart may not be initially increased, but there is increase in the weight of the heart. Later on there is dilatation and there is weakening of the heart muscle. This will lead to left ventricular failure because the contractility of the myocardium is affected. Whenever there is pump failure, there will be back pressure increase in the left atrium and then to the lungs, and finally going to the right side of the heart and then to the venous circulation. This is known as congestive cardiac failure. Cardiac arrhythmias can also occur because the heart size is increased. There may be ventricular arrhythmias, there will be of course tachycardia, and atrial arrhythmias like atrial fibrillation, and sometimes ventricular fibrillation may be a cause of certain death. Cardiac ischemia may result from atherosclerosis of the coronary vessels, or when the heart size increases, insufficient supply of the blood to the myocardium. And some of the factors may lead to certain cardiac death. For example, ischemia to the heart may lead to angina, severe angina or infarction. Cardiac arrhythmias, ventricular fibrillation is fatal, and also congestive cardiac failure which is not treated may be fatal. Now this is perhaps the last slide. If you have any questions, you can post it to my email address and I will respond to them. But I would advise, always I say, that go through the lecture again, the PowerPoint presentation which I will upload, and then see the relevant portion from Robbins or any other book which we have prescribed for pathology. And still, if some queries or the concept not clear, you can send your queries to my email and I will respond.